So, and Jarvis, I asked Jarvis, who could I interview beside you? And he suggested to interview you, and you have reacted very friendly to my, to my email, so I'm happy to sit here with you. Your name is Yabome?
Yabome.
Gilpin-Jackson?
That's right.
Okay. And I do not know much about you. Maybe I learn more in our conversation. I saw a video of yours, and I was impressed with how much passion you talked about personal transition. And on the other hand, I hear from Jarvis that you are now ahead of an association or movement of OD. Is that true? That you got a new role in the OD field?
Yeah, so he may be referring to, before the camera came on, we were talking about my role within the health authority here in Vancouver. So I lead the OD practice within the health authority.
Oh, this is what is new?
I'm sure. I think that's what he's referring to. It's not new, but it's not new. But yes, I have an internal OD lead role as well as an external consulting role in the field.
So you know both sides.
Both worlds, yes.
And is it a benefit for you? You experience it as a benefit, or is it a burden?
I certainly see it as a benefit. In fact, I maintain working as an external consultant and maintain a small consulting practice, which is probably where you saw the video with supporting learning and development consulting. That I have found working externally across different industries and with different clients continues to build my perspective on what works across industries, across different sectors, and with different leadership levels. It helps me to have a broader perspective. I think one of the challenges of being internal is the tendency to become fused with your client group and to know the system so well that sometimes that value that we bring as OD practitioners, where we're able to see the system and see the organization and see what's going on, see the patterns, and be able to speak to those patterns and support people and leaders to think differently about maybe patterns that are not serving them well in creating, the effective, the efficient, the thriving organizations that they want. I think one of the challenges of being internal is that over time it becomes easy to start to lose that ability to see the system and name what's going on and name the patterns. But I think for me, maintaining an external practice actually helps me to continue to have that insight and foresight. And I don't want to say objectivity. I have a interesting relationship with that word because I really believe in social construction and how we create each other's experiences all the time. But there is still a value as an OD practitioner that I've been able to maintain some neutrality and some ability to speak about what's going on.
Yeah, and offers this as a hypothesis.
That's right, as a bit of a mirror. And I think being an external consultant has helped me to continue to do that internally.
So maybe it just leads me to a question, as an internal, what message do you have for the externals? What should they do and what should they avoid? What makes you as an internal, being a responsible person in the organization and being a specialist in OD and coaching, I guess. We'll talk about this later.
Yeah, no problem.
How do you look at the services and the mentalities that are approaching you from outside?
That's an interesting question. I think that what I would say, and obviously I'm speaking to myself as well, right? As I switch hats, that's what I was laughing about. It's like, okay, a little bit schizo here. Is as an internal, when I engage with colleagues that are external, really in that perspective, what I'm looking for is thought leadership. What I'm looking for is expanding our capacity to create together new ways of thinking, new ways of working that I can't think about on my own, or again, because as an internal, maybe I'm too linked to the system, I'm too tied to the way things are. What I need is that thought partner that really comes with me, thinks with me, works with me, creates with me. And so that works for me better than having an expert consultant with one way of thinking or looking. What I look for working with externals and the value that I try to bring when I'm an external is adding value to what's already there by engaging, understanding, listening deeper, and then bringing these multiple other experiences and testing and saying, what about this? And how about that? And so that for me is what's most important, is not making assumptions about the system, being willing to learn, to listen, and to just multiply the capacity that's there, as opposed to having an orientation around fixing what's there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And you several times use the word authority. I don't know whether I understood that right, but it creates a question in my mind. The people in power in your organization, if they have the idea we should develop the organization, do they come to you?
A significant amount of the time. I think it is ongoing a challenge for us with the system that we work in. It is so large, so complex, and so diverse. Sometimes I think leaders don't always know what they don't know. And so sometimes, I don't think intentionally, but sometimes assumptions are made about the value that we provide, or the services that we can provide relative to what another external consultant can provide. So sometimes we have had situations where a leader has gone to an external consultant first and then realized, oh, I could have worked with the internal team. But the other thing that complicates our work and how we work with our leaders is that, again, the system is so large, we're not always able to provide everything that is asked of us. So if you think from a consulting perspective, the language, a pair of hands, where we go really deeply and alongside the client and help all the way through implementing whatever service or processes or changes that they're doing. Say something like a culture change initiative can take several years, and sometimes we don't have the physical capacity to walk with that client the whole time, and so sometimes our leaders, clients, will look for additional capacity that's not us, because of the level of service that we're able to provide or not provide.
Yeah, I understand this. We try, because this is almost always the case, that to do profound OD work or coaching work for everybody who can make use of it, this would be just too much. So we try to develop approaches that can be multiplied by those who are there.
Exactly.
For example, if we do some leadership relationship training and maturity training, where are we, where do we want to go, what time and energy do we have for learning, what can we reach then, which kind of instruments can we then use, that when they learn to develop themselves, they also learn, how can I teach my colleagues? And so we try in the beginning, and this gives, this produces a selection of approaches, because you cannot only use approaches where you have a trained OD or coaching specialist. And so this changed our attitude, and we try still to develop not too simple, superficial things, but really help people to spread intelligent and heartful dialogues within the organization.
Yes, absolutely. I am very, very passionate around, and I talk about, we in our practice talk about doing work that builds leaders' capacity and people's capacity to be able to multiply these, as you said, ways of working that really supports their teams, their people that they work with, to all be working together for whatever the shared vision is, or the goal is, or the leadership capacity is that we're trying to create. But really working so that people are able to develop the capacity themselves, they're able to learn these ways of working, and then they're able to spread it themselves, as you said, as opposed to us doing it. I always say the D in organization development is about development. I really, my heart is around transformational learning and development. And I often say that when we're doing OD work that's very reactive, we're doing organization development work that's just responding to, my team's not working well, I need team building, we're just responding to dysfunctions and not building the capacity of teams and organizations to not only be functional but to be thriving, then we're not doing our job.
So you try to head in the direction of soil building and not always firefighting.
Absolutely. I understand that sometimes in our work we do need to firefight.
Sometimes the prevention of burning is so low that it's always burning.
It's always, exactly. So for me, it's always, what can we be doing that puts out fires and then, creates the soil so that the fire doesn't reoccur. Maybe a different, in how complex the world has become, maybe a new fire comes up that we didn't anticipate. That's okay. I realize that happens. But when we're always putting out fires that we know how they start, we know how to put them out, and we have to keep doing the same thing to
it might be more
put them
important to
out.
have a non-smoker program.
I know. Then there's something wrong with that picture. Where I love to spend energy is thinking about how do we keep this place as fireproof as possible. And when new and different fires show up, what can we learn from that? What does that look like? What is the opportunity for us to learn something that will help us now anticipate something else that we wouldn't have anticipated without this fire? So even seeing fires as possibility, right? They can be passionate flames and not burning fires.
Many professionals do this somehow in practice, but they are not writing textbooks on it or not making a program out of it. So they do not put it in the showroom window. These strategic focuses, do you go to your bosses and they see, okay, we have to fight fire, we do it if necessary, but 50% or however you would number it of the time we want to build up a strategy of learning, of mutual dialoguing, of finding ways that the right people are well trained enough and know about each other, can collaborate. That if there is a challenge, they are prepared, what we call maturity.
That's right. Absolutely 100%. I think about myself, and I went to the graduate program that I did for my doctorate. Was a scholar practitioner program for that reason. I love the practice of organization development and leadership and change. I love working with leaders, thinking about how we're going to impact this place, in the way that we want. I love that practice. I love facilitating and all of that. And I equally love the scholarship behind it. I love being able to think about why human systems work the way that they work. I love to be able to debrief learning and figure out, okay, why did as I said, there's this network of leaders we've created in my internal role, and thinking about why is this network working so well? What is it about the context of the network, about the way that we support the network that is allowing these leaders to thrive and become a focus in the organization, as examples of, what strong leaders are doing that's impacting their teams around them. And I think without the capacity to step back and think together and learn together, the core, that's the core and the heart of our field. And I think without that, the tendency is for our work to be seen as just another tool, just another method, you know, the stuff that nobody understands. I think the more that we can put names and labels, I'm using that loosely, and create mental frameworks for people to understand why what we do in organization development, in leadership coaching, in organizational coaching is important and makes a difference, the better for us, for our field to have greater credibility and greater impact. So for me, that is non-negotiable.
And is this a new development? Because in Germany it's not a long time that we really can find partners for this highly qualified discussions and the sustainable considerations. You talk about it as if it's quite natural to you.
Yeah. So for me, it is sort of the way that I have worked, and I have been really, really lucky with the organizations that I have worked with, where these ways of thinking, learning, writing about, debriefing what we're learning as we're learning, the practice of experiential teaching and learning and transformational teaching and learning, both for ourselves and for our clients. I've been lucky to work in groups and in organizations where this is just the way we've worked. And I have selected organizations for this purpose, to advance my practice in this way, and I've also worked with groups where the idea of, you know, the change, the transformation starts with me, and it starts with us. Before we can spread it out, we have to do it ourselves. That has been critical to my practice, and I've been really lucky, both in where I've worked and also being intentional about choosing those organizations.
And when you come, I don't know whether this is the case, as an external to a company or an organization, and you want to offer this attitude and this way of configuring services, are you welcome with that? Or is it easy, or is it difficult? What is the maturity on the field here?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, and I realize I didn't answer that part of your question. I think as a field, sort of in the business environment and in organizations, it depends on the industry and the organization. Some places, we go and you're expected to bring the scholarship behind the work. And other places that I go as an external, that will be seen as too much intellectual speak. So for me, what I do in my practice is I understand the context that I'm going into. And in some contexts, I will bring, I'll bring the article that is the background for what we're going to do, or I'll talk about the work in the way that we're talking about it right now. And in other places, I don't lead with the methodology and the scholarship. I just lead with the process. I say, this is your desired outcome. This is what we talked about, what you as a group said you would like to achieve. Here's one process that comes from this field that I know works to achieve this outcome. Why don't we try it? And we go straight into the work without too much of a preamble
to give
of
them
the
a
context.
Taste of it.
Exactly. So I lead with the practical side of things. I think it's
people
mixed.
have to experience examples.
Exactly.
To get motivated to learn more about it.
Yeah.
And do you do it as your instrument, or did you develop instruments that you can give to them to use themselves? And teach them how to use them. What is your understanding of your perspective and your role? The background is that in my institute, I was a psychotherapist and a teaching psychotherapist, and the models in which we taught was usually we demonstrate or we supervise. But we did not much develop educational didactic, how people can learn, and we did not invest into making short papers, exercises, strategies to introduce methodology to a system that they can carry on it by themselves. But if you want to have a broader impact, you cannot do it by highly trained specialists. You have to. I do not believe that you can put everything into instruments and they will know what to do with it. But we did not use enough the possibilities to give people instruments that carry the culture we want to teach them.
Yeah. In my practice, and again, I had the privilege. Jervis was actually my master's thesis supervisor, and I worked with him in graduate school for my master's, and then went to Fielding Graduate University, where the focus really is on developing practitioners that build capacity for organizational change as well as social impact. So very focused on social change and social justice and meaningful organizational change. In all of that, I think the biggest thing that I took away from that scholarship into my practice is that real focus on what I call deep developmental learning, transformational learning, where it's focused on giving people experiences that allow them to access thinking, attitudes, the emotional state around issues in ways that they had not realized before. And because the idea of the way I practice is to really have people holistically as a whole person engage and think and reflect and learn, is that my hope is it creates a sustainable impact. And then once they have gone through whatever process it is that we're going through, definitely talking about how could you now also use this, spread this, create more of this. So I'm sure you and Jervis talked about dialogic organization development, but what drew me to the practice of dialogic organization development before the label that Jervis and Bob Mashak have put around this set of practices was my desire to practice in a way that makes a lasting impact for people. So when you just bring a tool, as you're saying, it's surface impact. We had a great experience, we had a great session, we did some things and we got some outcomes. When you focus on developmental learning and transformational learning and have people really examine themselves and their thoughts and their practices, when they get to a point where they're willing to shift and they make a shift, it's more of a lasting shift. It's harder to go back. So I've been practicing in these ways, primarily trying to give people an experience of change and then talk about the change and give them the tools that we use so that they can also use them and spread them, whatever is meaningful to them. So like you, I think that certainly making the technologies of organization development and the ways of working of organization development accessible to people is very important. I also believe that whatever is most meaningful and important to them in the whatever process you share, whatever they take away and practice, that's good enough. So for myself, I'm not a one methodology person. So I don't just use appreciative inquiry. I don't just use open space. I tend to mix methods and design a process that will be most useful to people. I will share these processes after people have experienced them, and then people have the freedom to choose. It might be that it's just one aspect of appreciative inquiry, like appreciative thinking, constantly thinking about what do I want more of, as opposed to what am I lacking. It might be that that's the only thing they take away, but if they take that away meaningfully, then that's really rich and important to me.
Yeah, impressive.
Yeah.
And are there tendencies? One of the things we try at my institute is inviting professionals like you to come together and to build a network and build a language together, build a methodology together, and even finding models, business models of working together like a bigger consulting company without building a bigger company. So that they have a chance from big companies to get projects because they are big enough, because we have somehow in the world, it's split into big companies who do some kind of schemata.
That's right.
And many genius, self-employed people who do not together develop enough force and methodology to to offer an option to these big companies
Right.
for big processes.
Yes, yeah.
Are there any impulses in this direction in your field?
Oh yeah, I think collaboration, especially in our field, where the reality is that the organization development, education, and training is geared towards developing, which is funny, it's geared towards developing individual independent practitioners, even though we work at the level of system and we work with systems. So I think that as a community of practitioners, you're right. I think that kind of work is crucial to develop a network of practitioners and leverage and scale methodology. I think it's crucial because this is what essentially we preach to organizations.
Yeah.
This is what we support organizations to
And
do.
we organize the complexity we want to teach.
Exactly, and yet as a community of practitioners, we don't do that very well. I think it's a model. It's the model of the future. The world is increasingly spread and yet networked at the same time. So the world is more open and we're more networked. So opportunities to collaborate and create ways of working and ways to develop new methodologies on behalf of clients, with clients, or just with ourselves for our own thinking and learning as a community of practice is absolutely important. One of the places that I worked, one of the groups that I was fortunate to work with early in my career was a group that had 2 senior partners, and I was the only staff consultant. What we did was develop a network of collaborators, both locally in Vancouver and internationally. So depending on the project, we would list different team members. Some would be in New York, some would be somewhere in Europe, didn't matter, based on their skill and their background and their capacity, so that the whole team that we were presenting had all of the skills that we needed. But yet in the office, there were only 3 of us there.
But the difficult organizational development of such a system. It's not enough that everybody is a good professional.
Yeah.
So you need a role differentiation.
Yeah.
Many questions of an organization should be answered.
Yeah, and it worked really well in that system.
Okay.
What we did was we'd once we had proposed it to a client, and if we won the bid to a client, and usually we would use our collaborators on bigger projects. Once we won the bid, the first thing we did was a project launch meeting, where we would, everybody will call in, again, people were not necessarily here, and then we would say, this is the project, here's the work, and here are the roles that are possible, and have that conversation with the collaborators. Again, depending on where people live, whether they're able to come, or if we're going somewhere to the client who was able to come or not, this is how we decided on roles. Who would be the facilitation team in the room with the client? Who would be the analysts? Who will be the co-designers? And how are we going to do that? But we absolutely started each piece of work with this meeting, and we ended each piece of work with a big debrief and learning about how the process had worked.
Who invented, for example, this example? Who is in charge in building up that structure and this culture between professionals?
Yeah.
Was it you? Or?
No, when I started at this organization, the model had already started. I worked with 2 senior practitioners who have changed focus a little bit since then. But this was their model, because they were a small entrepreneurial group, but wanting to work on bigger projects and scale. So that's where this idea came from.
And is it published somewhere already, or is it a program already to tell the field this is where we should develop to?
In terms of, was it a best practice that I would recommend other people look at? I think absolutely. I think it was a great model to bring, and even for us, it was one of the things I loved in that organization was our think tank meetings, right? When we had different people, some of who we had only ever talked to on the phone, coming with different ideas, different perspectives about how we could achieve the client's goals. It was very stimulating and innovative to work this way.
I love it, and I'm still a bit astonished how easy it works, as you tell it. Who pays for that? For example, if we try to get professionals together, either we have to come with a very interesting topic or a speaker or a project where they can make money with.
Yeah.
It's not easy to have people to come together and invest their time and their passion, and it's not easy to get an organization to finance these kind of soil building. Is it easier in your country or in your field?
I don't think necessarily it's easier. I think in the two examples that are in my mind, both of them came with funding. So the first one, usually we had already won a big client project. So there was a guarantee for these collaborators that they would get they would get they would be paid for their time on the project, on the collaboration, on the design meetings. There was a guarantee that they would get paid. So again, in that model, we, the small internal team, will have done the proposal work. We would have done the client relationship stuff. That was what we owned, as well as being part of the facilitation, design, and consulting team once we won the contract. But we only pull in collaborators after we have won the contract. We let them know ahead of time, here's the piece of work, we're going to include you in the team, and they usually would have said yes. In the other model, this was a model within a university, Simon Fraser University, had this idea of the business school, faculty in the business school had this idea of, you know, we do all of this research and we do all of this work that should impact organizations. Why don't we have a group whose mandate is to take the best of the business school research, the best of the thinking that the faculty is doing, and bring it to business? So I became part of this group. I joined this group. It was called the Learning Strategies Group. And our mandate was to take the best thinking from the business school, best thinking in organization development, and create programs and processes to offer business and organizations. And we did. Our mandate wasn't to make huge profits. We covered costs, but we were funded by the university to host this space and this think tank and this incubator for innovation. And it worked really well. And ultimately, we ended up covering costs and making a profit for ourselves and for the university. Nearly for as long as this group existed. It doesn't exist anymore in that same form, but again, the backing was there.
Oh yeah, I understand now. Because it's wonderful when the university really has that passion to develop something usable and building a frame for the dialogue between practitioners and researchers and scientists.
Yes.
So you were lucky, obviously,
absolutely,
to be a part of this project.
Yes, yeah. And that group as well, what was different about it is the model and the motive wasn't for profit. So I think in most business schools and universities, you'll have your executive ed and your continuing ed schools where you're offering education and you're wanting to make some profit out of it. The Learning Strategies Group, the model for that group was not necessarily, it was just cover your costs if you can. Right? So.
And the members did it out of professional passion, or what was the motivation for people?
Well, a number of us were employed eventually with the group, but for faculty that engaged with us, that taught in our programs, you know, a lot of them would engage. It was the continuing passion of their research and the work that they were already doing. And again, in this model, because we were offering programs to businesses and, you know, the corporate environment, there was often some remuneration, maybe not huge, like if they were privately consulting, but there was some financial incentive, enough for them to come.
So there's a balance for giving and taking.
Exactly. So there was enough incentive. So I think, as we're talking, what's coming up for me is, I think at the end of the day, I think it's absolutely critical that we design new ways of working together, new ways of collaborating, new ways of creating new ways for business and organizations and society to work in ways that creates some responses to how complex our environment is now, And I do think that, just as we've been talking, that these need to be created in a way that has enough incentive for people to come. Because I think that when it's possible, like I love what you're doing, as you said, this is not about money, this is about sharing and learning and advancing the profession at this stage in your career. It's legacy work, it's great work, and it's making a difference for the field. And I think depending on where you are in your career, you might need more or less incentive, right? So altogether, I think, how do we harness people like you that have such experience in the field and looking at how do we advance the field and build legacy now? How do we combine that and harness that with people emerging and coming into the field and people in the middle that have had, some experience but not as much benefit of experience as you might have? How do you pool all of that and create different kinds of incentives for all of those groups to come?
That's wonderful, and I would call this an entrepreneurial task.
Yeah.
And I do not find many people who are able to do it and are passionate to do it, or if they have talents and passions, they do their business. It's not easy to find the people really to serve with this entrepreneurial talents for the field, because what you said is legacy work, and some, when they have done their main career, they are open to do that, but then still it's not easy, because very often they have then the attitude, I'm an elder statesman, and come to me and I tell you what I learned. They are not, it's not so easy to get them really to understand that we all have together learn and to develop. So I find it important, but not easy. To develop that.
Yeah, I can understand.
We can do that because we have a big training institute, and we have a name in the field, and we have the money because we have enough programs that we can invest that and build the frames, and so and still it's not easy to get forward in this direction.
So that's an interesting inquiry, an interesting question to ask ourselves is, how do we create incentives at multiple levels that allow us to be in this kind of conversation and this kind of learning together in order to advance the field? What does that look like at different levels? And what would make the difference? As you said, it's difficult, even for someone like you that has the resources and passion to do it. So what would make the difference to have people come, I think is what you're saying. Yeah. To have people come to this conversation.
We share the necessity and the questions. And you have some very good experiences on that. I hope this goes on.
I think one of the you asked earlier if in my practice do I work with methodologies, have I developed my own? I realized I didn't quite respond to that as well. It's a bit of both for me because I continue to research and write as well. And one of the things that I'm working on right now is I did some research on transformation processes for people who had very difficult situations, traumatic situations.
In the organizational role?
Well, it started in their lives, and actually where it really started was me looking at how to support and facilitate transformation in post-trauma contexts, where there's been social trauma, like war. As we were saying before we started the interview, part of my background and heritage is in Sierra Leone, and there was the big civil war there. So one of the things I've always been interested in and passionate about is what does transformation look like for people, for leaders coming out of those contexts that just seem to be doing incredible, what you're saying, passion work, at the level of being entrepreneurial about it, as well as giving back to society almost selflessly in some cases, where they seem to be bringing so much heart and soul to tackling big issues and making a difference. So it's similar to what you're saying, how do we do that? So there was this group of people that I was sort of watching who I know because of my background have had this significant life traumas, and yet they were doing the exact thing that you're talking about. So I interviewed some of these people. I read autobiographies. These were leaders that people in their communities. I asked communities. I asked African community groups. Again, that just comes from my background, and that was a starting place for me as someone from Sierra Leone. I asked community groups who they would identify as people that they consider transformational leaders. And these were, you know, people like this one woman who's from Rwanda who lived through the genocide. You know, everybody around her was killed, and she survived. And she moved to Canada, and has now, she's done her master's in leadership, and she started this network of schools in Rwanda to educate the next generation and sort of break barriers and bridge the divides and have the next generation of children that may not have experienced the genocide but are significantly impacted by it, learn to lead in that context and lead differently. And she's doing some incredible work. And also here she's working, she's a constant advocate, she does some great work. So that's just one example of the kind of people that I interviewed. And what I found talking to them is for the sort of common pattern among them was not a denial of the trauma. All of them were very clear about the experiences that they've had, the impact it had on them, the difficulty of it. And all of them had a very clear narrative of this being something that had happened to them, but precisely because of that, it was a reason that they didn't want to give up, and they wanted to give back to society so that other people didn't have to have these experiences. So I ended up characterizing this pattern, this journey. So they seem to go through this journey of working through the trauma, wrestling with it, struggling with it, and hitting this point, and I just call it a point, but sometimes it wasn't a point, but these moments of what I called resonance, where they deeply connected to why their life was still important. And sometimes these were memories that were preceding the trauma. It was before the war, it was some childhood dream, it was some passion that they had. And then as they hit this resonance, what it did was unlock a bunch of insights and new ways of thinking that allowed them to move forward, integrate their traumatic experience. And I'm sure you understand this with your psychology background. They were able to integrate the traumatic experience, but at the same time, move forward sort of futuristically and aspirationally, and continue to work with the trauma when and how it shows up, but never letting it stop or deter them. So I characterize this phenomena as resonance and resonance moments that unlock transformation. And what I found, so I did this again in the context of war trauma, social trauma, and then sort of thought, why did I do that research when all of my work and background has been in leadership and organization development? Didn't seem like work that I could move into organizations because I had been looking at people who had social trauma. But just in the context of the school I went to and the work I was doing in my doctorate and the personal work I was doing, I decided to go with something that I had a passion for, that wasn't a usual sort of thing that I would have done. So that was my challenge to myself. So I did this work and thought, what am I going to do with it? So then I went back to work in organization development and in healthcare, where there's constant complexity, constant changes, we're a public health system, so constant mandates from the ministry, constant political environments, partnerships to build, lots of changes all the time. And at some point we were in the middle of a massive change, And I'd had conversations with a number of leaders that just seemed to be struggling so hard with what was occurring. And I was looking at the situation and thinking, I wonder if there seemed to be so much internalized stress and almost internalized trauma around the changes, because there were multiple changes over a period of time. And I thought, I wonder if this resonance stuff applies. So I thought I'd just try it. So I looked then at the literature around organizational trauma, which is not where I started with this work, but I looked about it and realized a couple of things. There's not a lot of literature about it. Secondly, there's a sort of a handbook that has been created out of the UK of scholars and practitioners that are trying to document this phenomena, who have characterized it as another element of the unconscious life of groups. So as you know, from the psychology lens, there's those unconscious elements of group life that we defend against, right? And they've characterized organizational trauma as another unconscious element of group life. We defend against it. We don't want to acknowledge that some organization event has had a traumatic internal impact on us. And I thought, oh my goodness, I wonder then if I use the lens of resonance and work with leaders and groups and invite them to think about their resonance stories. All of this work around resonance was founded in narrative and narrative inquiry and making sense of your own narrative in the midst of the changes. I wonder if that would make a difference. And do you know it did? It was so exciting. We did a series of workshops where I developed this narrative process around connecting to resonance stories, having people think about what needs to be transformed. What's the story that you're stuck in? What's the situation? What needs to be transformed? What's your interior state about it? So thinking about how am I thinking about it? How am I feeling about this change? What's my interior state around it? And then once they'd done that sort of inquiry work, looking at what's a resonance story for you, talking about what resonance is, and inviting them to think about a resonance story that's part of their life narrative, that connects them to their organizational purpose. So that connection between personal coaching and organization development, right?
I'm so glad that you come to this focus.
So what is something deeply personal to you, to your life, to your history that connects you to this organization purpose? They do that work, they tell their stories in small communities, working usually in twos or threes.
And they share within one organization, so that they learn about the background images and the background motivations of others. I have a communication model that is one of the levels is that we are intuitively sensible for the myths the other person is living, and somehow we can work on other levels and deal with complexity. When we get in a kind of contract of the soul about together live our myths, for example, together overcoming drama. Well, I do, and for me that's a little bit like social construction. Somehow when you tell the story with other people, it takes shape, it changes, and other people listening into that story or sharing it. You understand the mirroring and the resonance, so you understand which kind of story makes sense to invite others into a new coalition. So that ideally, in the end, a team of responsible people is my definition of teams. Those who are together responsible for something. That on a level of the soul, they have an intuitive understanding how what they are doing at the surface is also living their individual and conjoined myths.
You got it. So that's exactly what I'm discovering in this work is when you do this work and people share those resonance stories together. I've done it both with a public group of people. So in my private practice, just had an open workshop, so people from all industries, and I've done it in my internal role as well. Connect to these resonance stories, and then after that, now looking at the situation and saying, well, what needs to be done? What action do I need to take with those resonance stories in focus? And it made a significant difference both ways. I know that in the open workshop, there were participants there who were at the point of wanting to wrap up the organization they were a part of because it was a small organization and they thought they couldn't do it anymore, they continued on after that day, after connecting to their resonance, what was important to them in doing the work.
So it's a new contract, a new solidarity?
Yes, and a new level of engagement to what they're responsible for that is not anchored in something outside of them. It's anchored in what's important to them.
Yeah.
So it's a different kind of sort of intrinsic connection. Yeah. And to bring this back full circle, I think I started telling you about this because I think that people who experience deep transformation in this way, it's one way, but in this way, for example, of resonance, as I've described it, I find they have more of a drive. In fact, that's the word that some of my participants used, a drive, a determination to make a difference in the world that's not so financially motivated. So, yes, they all want to make a good living and have a good life. And at the same time, they spend their time and their energy, they come to the table again and again around ways of learning, working together, making a difference in society. These questions that you started with in terms of how do we get people to come to the table. People who operate from resonance and that personal transformation, I find is less of a pull. They'll make time, they'll make the money, they'll pay their own money.
And you offer them really a frame of reference where they can develop and understand meaning and their meaning in life, how they are personally connected.
Yes.
And sometimes it's not the what we are doing, it's more the how we are doing it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this is what I call culture. So that's a new way to form culture. And certainly I'm interested, you should not produce weapons with this culture. You should produce something what on the content, on the what level also is really something that is serving development of humanistic perspectives.
Yes, yeah.
So it's not difficult for you, I guess, in the health service business, or is it something that's a problem?
Developing humanistic ways of working and connection that creates something greater?
That you say, okay, I'm doing work to help people to be touched, to bring in their soul in the work, but when I look at the structures of the products, at the political circumstances, it might also be a kind of seduction to feel meaning and not be so critical about what we are doing and what purposes we are serving.
You know what, absolutely. I think in somewhere like healthcare, and I think in human service work in general, whether it's healthcare or social work, some aspects of education, I think there's the tendency and temptation to get desensitized. That precisely because of that, it's easy to start taking for granted we're in the business of healing people. I hear people say that a lot now, right? So we're in the business of healing people, right? So using sort of two polarities together, and I understand why people would say we're in the business, because there is financial issues wrapped around healthcare. But because of these sort of contradictions and polarities, I think over time, it becomes easy to get desensitized and start thinking about healthcare, human services, things like working with and integrating refugees as just a numbers game, as a production cycle, as just the thing that we do, and losing the heart behind it. So I think actually, especially in human service industries, it is equally, if not more important, to stay connected to what's important.
I believe so.
Yeah. I think it's deeply, deeply important.
And this is, I'm really curious on something. It's not a critical question. Because I always say, this is moving and it's wonderful. And then sometimes I think, okay, and then we call this a soulful qualification of individuals. And how can we bring that in transformation of structures and processes and business models of the organization. Because if this doesn't change, it's attention.
Yeah. So you just hit one of my pet peeves, my little soapbox around, in some ways, as organization development, human systems practitioners, we're almost developing our own insular group. We have our own language.
Right.
We know what things mean. We know how to manipulate systems and all of this. And I think in a lot of ways we end up being marginalized from the rest of the organization and the other functions and how things really happen. So,
and they can afford to have us even if we don't matter, or if they have enough money.
That's right.
Or they find a way to raise money for that and keep something beside.
That's right. I think we become nice to have as opposed to critical to how business and organizations operate, which is where we need to be, critical to the way we work and do work. So I think, I don't know that there's an easy answer. I hope, I'm not trying to give answers here to things that I don't necessarily have answers to, but I think that one way is just to do what we do, instead of continuing, I think, to try to justify why we're doing what we're doing. It's a subtle difference, but in our practice, for example, in the internal role, in the health authority, we have just made conscious decisions around how we facilitate meetings, how we host groups, how we host conferences, where we just intentionally embed practices of, say, dialogic OD or ways to connect people to what's important in humanistic values. We just do it so that what's happening now is people are getting attuned to that and used to that and expect that when we come together, we would jokingly say at our meetings and our forums and stuff, we're going to open, and as usual, we're going to start with connection before content. And then we'll facilitate some kind of process that allows people to connect to what's important to them, why it's important for them to be there, why the day needs to be well spent doing the work that we've intended to do. And we almost, I don't want to say never, so I'll just say almost never do a piece of work in our practice without starting with connection.
So you create a bit of subculture, but a culture, a customs system, and everybody. For me, culture has to do with it is experienced as normal.
Yes,
they develop a new understanding of normality, and if you do it with people who work together every day, not just getting them from all kinds of organizations, then they have a chance together in complementary contributions to keep to this new cultural elements.
Yes.
That's really influence over time and also the culture of an organization. And I guess if this also leads to new structures and new rituals,
new ways of working, new
rituals,
exactly.
business models, and all
exactly.
that. So
So we just do it. We just build it in wherever, however we can. Conscious attention to why is it important that we're here? What would the patients think? What, who else needs to be in this conversation? We just stay in inquiry, ask the questions, create connection at every level, any chance that we have. And over time, I think it's starting to take hold. It's still, there's still harder days. And
certainly. I have a provocation. Will it survive when you will be taken out?
I think not because of me. I think this is a practice that has developed even before I arrived in this organization, and therefore there's a long tradition, and therefore I think it will sustain. There are many hands that have touched this practice, and what's core to the hands that have touched the practice is a commitment to these transformational ways of working and humanistic ways of working. And so almost anyone we recruit into our practice, it's expected.
And organizations who want to copy it, for how many years of development have to be prepared?
Well, one example I can give you is that in this organization, we've done Jervis Bush's clear leadership work. So clear leadership, also a deeply developmental way of thinking about leadership and communicating and developing partnerships. We've done it, I believe, for about 13 years. Well, I believe at like 40 cohorts of leaders and people in the organization that have gone through this development.
And then slowly it starts to develop a systemic
Yes.
new pattern.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I always say major developments you have to at least to think of 7 years of development. So you have 2 rounds
Yeah.
set, and I believe that it's
Yeah.
a bigger an organization. It's
a huge
and
organization.
it's totally opposite to mentality.
Yeah.
We often have they think they can do it in 1 year or 2 years.
know.
It's not possible.
I know.
I don't know how it could be possible.
Yeah, and I think that it's easy to, the thing that I have to keep working on myself is not to get discouraged by the seed planting. I think sometimes in our work and in the field, it feels like you're scattering seeds and nothing's growing. But I 100% believe that none of those seeds are wasted. I believe that you just don't know when things are going to come together and create, I guess in complexity thinking, it's called the butterfly effect, right? You just don't know when all of these pieces are going to come together and all of a sudden the puzzle is going to make sense. Or, the garden's going to flourish all of a sudden. It seems like you've been tilling it for years and nothing's growing, and all of a sudden it grows. But that all of a sudden comes from the context of working the soil and being consistent over time. And I don't think any of it is wasted.
Right. But you need a support system to sustain.
Yes.
Do you have one, and how did you create it, or was it created?
For myself or for the practice?
For both, for you in your professional and your organizational role.
Yeah.
Because if you have to wait 10 years for major effects, then in between you must have somehow satisfying, engaging life.
Yeah. I think in our practice, certainly we've had a lot of support. We've had executive and leaders that understand that organization development is the context for culture. It's the foundation from which good and great work happens. And so we've had executive leaders that have really supported our programs, our initiatives, our work over the years. We've also, in more recent years, become more intentional about sharing our stories, sharing the impact of our work, both the short-term immediate impact, which for me is always just at the level of outcome. This is the outcome you asked for. This is what we did. Here's the process we went through. This is how we delivered it. But again, of course, our work, the results are often a year, 2 years delayed. So just being in constant communication and helping leaders rethink the idea of returning on investment. I wrote a recent blog post that I titled Return on Relationships. But then I had the opportunity to teach, to be with a group of master's students in organization development a couple weeks later, and with another colleague faculty member, really seasoned in this field as well, who we were talking about this, the whole sustainability and evaluation of our work and return on investment. And I talked about, I think about it now as return on relationships, and I'm very intentional about talking to executive and leaders and helping them realize, here are immediate outcomes, I'll deliver that, but know that to see the impacts, this is what needs to be invested over time so that you can see the impacts and we can document them. And he said, maybe we should call it return on imagination so that we keep ROI the same. Return on imagination. What's the return on allowing your system to imagine what's possible in new ways over time? It's hard to imagine how to quantify that. But if you believe that that's important, how do you create the environment where you allow people to continually imagine and innovate? And if we want to be concrete about it, we know, like from innovation research and all of the scholarship that's come out of there, that the only way to create innovation is to create space for innovation. It's the same in our work. The only way to create thriving cultures and great workplaces is to create the environment for it. the space for it.
Yeah, we say culture is produced by culture.
That's right.
And examples give you the lesson.
The examples.
Examples teach you how to.
Yes.
Real examples.
Yeah, practical ways of working. So, yeah, so I think that we've been lucky that way. We've been intentional. We've had leadership support. We've been intentional about sharing our stories in helping leaders think and rethink about when they say, how do we know it's making a difference? Think about what they mean by the return and what's possible in terms of returns. And for my private practice, honestly, I think for me what has helped me sustain momentum in this work is actually where you started, is being conscious about trying to make a contribution to the field in my thinking, in my writing. Honestly, I do that partly because it helps me learn and grow and digest. And an outcome of that is that I have been able to write, speak, publish in the field more than I initially intended. Because in the same way, seeds grow. You do one thing, it leads to another idea, you want to pursue that more. And so I think what has fed me actually is doing that thinking and writing in addition to my job roles and not letting that go. So for me, it's a personal passion. I love it. I love thinking and writing and learning what's behind what we do. And the more I do that, the more I grow and the more I'm able to be a contribution to the field. And yes, it has come with a personal cost. There's many nights that I'm here and my children are in bed and I'm reading some paper and I'm researching something. And even last night I was up trying to write this resonance story and thinking about should I create a book out of this to share this work? And I'm thinking about this and writing notes, and it's like in the middle of the night, I'm thinking, why am I doing this? And yet I'm driven by something more than maybe that's my own resonance. Is that,
This has to do with your biography.
That's right, exactly. My own narrative of who I am and what's important.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm so happy that I came here and learned from you how you do so many things in a quite similar way and attitude. And,
Thank you. It's been an honor.
And so.
It's been a real honor. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.